The hum of the bus engine droned on, a low, steady sound that seemed to blend with the rhythm of the road. 8-year-old Maya sat quietly near the back, clutching her tattered school bag as if it were a lifeline. The leather straps were worn thin, frayed from years of use, and one corner of the bag had a small tear, exposing the edge of a workbook. Her fingers, small but strong, gripped it tightly as she tried to make herself invisible. Her wide, brown eyes scanned the faces around her, searching for anything that felt safe. A kind smile, a gentle nod, even a glance of acknowledgement. But none came. They never did. Maya was used to this. The cold stares, the side glances that lingered just a second too long. The way people would shift uncomfortably in their seats as if her very presence disturbed them. She was small for her age, with thin, dark braids tied neatly with faded pink ribbons. Her clothes were clean but well worn, the hem of her dress slightly uneven, a clear sign that it had been mended more than once. The bus bumped along the uneven road, and Maya tightened her grip on the bag. Her heart pounded softly in her chest, not from fear but from a deep sense of loneliness. This was her routine. Every day, she boarded the bus with quiet steps, took her seat without a word, and endured the journey to and from school. Every day, the same icy silence greeted her, and every day, she told herself it didn't matter. But today was different. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror above him, catching sight of Maya's reflection. His expression hardened, his lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. He'd always been gruff, but there was something sharper in his gaze today. Something cruel. The bus rumbled to a stop at a red light, the air inside thick with unspoken tension. Maya felt it. She always did. It was the weight of judgment, heavy and unrelenting, pressing down on her like a storm cloud. She lowered her gaze to the floor, hoping to shrink away from the attention. The light turned green, and the bus lurched forward again. Maya tried to focus on the passing scenery outside the window, fields stretching out endlessly, dotted with the occasional tree. The early morning sun painted the world in soft hues, but it offered little comfort. Then, without warning, the bus screeched to a halt. The sound was jarring, the tires skidding against the asphalt with a high-pitched squeal. Maya was thrown forward slightly, her hands instinctively clutching the edge of the seat in front of her. The other passengers stirred, murmuring in confusion, but no one said a word as the driver rose from his seat. He turned, his tall frame casting a shadow down the aisle. His uniform was crisp, his hat tilted just so, but there was nothing kind about his demeanor. His eyes locked onto Maya, cold and unyielding. "You," he said, his voice gruff and sharp. Maya froze. Her small fingers curled tighter around the strap of her bag. "Out," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a moment, Maya didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was he looking at her like that? Why was he telling her to leave? "Out," he repeated, louder this time. The word echoed through the bus, bouncing off the walls like a slap. Maya looked around, her gaze darting to the other passengers. Surely someone would say something. Surely someone would stop him. But the faces that met her were blank, indifferent. A few people avoided her eyes altogether, turning their heads to look out the window or down at their laps. But why?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. It was barely audible, but in the silence of the bus, it seemed to linger. The driver's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "Don't make me say it again, girl," he snapped, his tone laced with impatience and something darker disdain. Maya's chest tightened. Her small heart pounded against her ribs, the rhythm quickening with every passing second. She stood slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. Her bag felt heavier than ever as she slung it over her shoulder. The bus door hissed open, the cool morning air rushing in like an unwelcome guest. Maya hesitated at the top step, glancing back one last time. Her gaze swept over the faces of the passengers, silently pleading for anyone to intervene. But no one did. The driver gestured impatiently. "Move," he said, his voice a growl. Maya stepped off the bus, her feet landing on the cracked asphalt. The door slammed shut behind her with a sharp clang, and the bus roared to life again. She stood there, frozen, as the vehicle pulled away, leaving her alone on the side of a deserted highway. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, replaced by an eerie silence. Maya hugged her bag close to her chest, her small frame trembling. The road stretched out before her, empty and endless. On either side, fields of tall grass swayed gently in the breeze, offering no shelter, no solace. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. She had to be strong, even if she didn't feel it. A single thought echoed in her mind, a question that burned brighter with every passing second: why? Why had he singled her out? Why had he thrown her off the bus in the middle of nowhere? She replayed the events in her head, searching for answers, but none came. She took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling with the effort. The morning sun was higher now, its warmth brushing against her skin. She looked down the road, her tiny shoes scuffed and worn from countless walks to school. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the whisper of the wind. And so, with hesitant steps, Maya began to walk. Maya's steps were slow at first, hesitant. Her legs felt shaky, and her bag, though not very heavy, seemed to weigh her down like a sack of bricks. She glanced back over her shoulder, hoping against all logic that the bus might return, that the driver would realize his mistake, or that someone from the passengers would come back for her. But the road was empty. Just her and the endless horizon. The morning air was crisp, and a gentle breeze ruffled the hem of her dress. On another day, she might have found the scenery peaceful. The fields stretched endlessly on either side, dotted with clusters of wild flowers. The faint hum of insects buzzed in the distance, blending with the rustling grass. But today, the beauty of her surroundings was lost on her. She walked along the edge of the road, her tiny shoes kicking up bits of gravel with each step. The world felt too big, too overwhelming, and she was so small. Every so often, she glanced up at the sky, watching the white clouds drift lazily past. Her mind was a swirl of confusion and questions. Why had the driver been so angry? She tried to recall if she had done something wrong. Maybe she had dropped something, or spoken too loudly, or sat in the wrong seat. But she couldn't think of anything. The faces of the passengers floated in her memory. Not a single one had stood up for her. Not even the older woman who had smiled faintly at her when she'd boarded the bus. Maya clenched her fists, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. Why hadn't anyone said anything? She kept walking. The road stretched on, curving gently with the land, and the fields gave way to clusters of trees. Their leaves shimmered in the sunlight, creating patches of shade that dappled the ground. Maya stepped into one of these shadows, pausing for a moment to rest. Her feet were starting to ache, and her stomach let out a soft growl. She hadn't eaten much that morning, just a small slice of bread and a bit of fruit. She had saved the rest for lunch, but now, the idea of waiting until lunchtime seemed impossible. Sitting down on a flat rock by the roadside, Maya rummaged through her bag. Her fingers brushed against her books and pencils before finding the small cloth bundle that held her food. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the half-eaten slice of bread and a bruised apple. She took a small bite of the bread, chewing slowly. It was dry and crumbly, but it eased the gnawing hunger in her belly. The apple was softer than she liked, but she ate it anyway, savoring its sweetness. As she ate, her eyes wandered to the road ahead. It stretched on endlessly, disappearing into the horizon where the sky met the land. A part of her wanted to cry, to sit there on the side of the road and wait for someone to find her. But another part of her, the stronger part, knew she couldn't stop. She wiped her hands on her dress and stood up, brushing off the dust from her skirt. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. And so she did. The hours seemed to blur together as Maya trudged along the road. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat beating down on her. Sweat gathered at the nape of her neck, and she wished she had thought to bring water. Her throat felt dry, and every step felt heavier than the last. As the afternoon wore on, the road began to change. The fields and trees became sparse, replaced by patches of dry, cracked earth. The air felt hotter here, drier, and Maya's small shadow stretched long behind her. She came across an old wooden fence, its paint peeling and its posts leaning at odd angles. Beyond the fence was a field overgrown with weeds, their tall stalks swaying in the breeze. In the distance, she spotted something, a small house, weathered and worn, with a sagging roof and windows that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Her heart lifted at the sight. Maybe someone there could help her. Gathering her courage, Maya turned off the road and made her way toward the house. The path was uneven, the dry grass crunching beneath her shoes. She reached the fence and climbed over it carefully, her small hands gripping the rough wood. When she reached the house, she hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. There was no sign of movement inside, no sound except for the rustling of leaves. "Hello?" Maya called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She stepped closer, peering through the open door. The interior was dim, the air cool and heavy with the scent of dust and wood. She took another step, her shoes scraping against the wooden floorboards. "Is anyone here?" she called again, louder this time. Still, there was no response. But something about the house felt safe, as though it were waiting for her. Maya walked inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The room was small, with a worn couch pushed against one wall and a table cluttered with papers and jars. A single window let in a shaft of sunlight, illuminating a patch of the floor. On the table, she noticed something, a glass jar filled with water. Her throat ached at the sight, and without thinking, she reached for it. The glass was cool against her palm as she lifted it to her lips, drinking deeply. The water was warm, but it felt like a blessing. She drank until the jar was empty, then set it back on the table with a soft clink. As she looked around the room, her eyes fell on a picture hanging crookedly on the wall. It showed a young girl, not much older than Maya, standing in front of the house. The girl had the same dark braids as Maya, tied with bright ribbons. Maya stared at the picture, her mind racing. Who was this girl? And why did she feel a strange connection to her? The sound of footsteps startled her, and she turned quickly, her heart pounding. A figure stood in the doorway, a woman, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and kind. She looked at Maya with a mixture of surprise and recognition, as though she had been expecting her all along. "You've come," the woman said softly, her voice carrying a weight that Maya couldn't understand. Maya started to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The woman stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Maya's face. "Come, child," she said gently. "You've been walking a long way. Let's get you some real food." The highway stretched out in both directions, endless and empty. The air around Maya was unnervingly still, broken only by the distant hum of the bus engine as it disappeared over the horizon. She stood frozen for a moment, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the open fields. A gust of cold wind whipped past her, ruffling her braids and sending a shiver down her spine. The echo of the slamming bus door lingered in her ears, a harsh reminder of what had just happened. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back were now welling in her eyes, blurring the landscape in front of her. She sniffled and wiped them away with the back of her hand, determined not to cry. Crying wouldn't help. Her tattered school bag felt heavier than ever as she gripped it close to her chest. It was all she had now, a small bundle of books, pencils, and a crumpled paper with her homework scribbled across it. Maya had always taken pride in her schoolwork, she loved to learn. But none of that seemed to matter to the driver or the passengers on the bus. "Why me?" she whispered to the wind, her voice barely audible. The question hung in the air, unanswered. She replayed the moment in her mind, trying to understand what she had done to deserve this. Was it because of the way she looked? Was it because she was different? Maya didn't know, but deep down, she felt the weight of unfairness pressing down on her small shoulders. The fields on either side of the highway seemed endless, stretching out to meet the horizon. The tall grass swayed gently, their golden tips brushing against the breeze. The vastness of the landscape only made her feel smaller, more isolated. Taking a deep breath, Maya began to walk. The soles of her shoes scraped against the rough asphalt as she moved forward, one hesitant step at a time. She didn't know where she was going. There was no sign of a town or even a house in sight. All she knew was that standing still wouldn't help her. Her stomach growled softly, a reminder that she hadn't eaten much that morning. The bread and fruit her mother had packed for her lunch felt like a distant memory now. Maya's throat was dry, and she wished she had a bottle of water, but she hadn't thought to bring one. As she walked, her thoughts swirled with questions. Why had the driver been so cruel? He hadn't even given her a reason, just barked at her to get off as if she were nothing but a nuisance. And why had none of the passengers spoken up? They had all sat there in silence, watching as an 8-year-old girl was thrown out onto the side of the road. She thought of the older woman who had been sitting near the front of the bus. For a brief moment, their eyes had met when Maya first got on. The woman's expression had softened, almost as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she had looked away, just like everyone else. Maya's small fists clenched at her sides. The unfairness of it all burned inside her, a mix of anger and sadness that she didn't know how to express. She kicked a small rock on the side of the road, watching it skitter across the pavement before landing in the tall grass. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth beating down on her as the day wore on. Sweat began to form on her forehead, and her legs ached from the endless walking. She had no idea how far she had gone or how much farther she had to go. The road seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the empty fields. But Maya kept walking. She didn't notice it at first, but there was a shift in the air. A faint rustling sound reached her ears, different from the gentle swaying of the grass. She paused, turning her head toward the sound. It was coming from the fields to her left, a rhythmic rustling, as if something was moving through the tall grass. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it an animal? A person? She squinted, trying to see through the thick stalks of grass, but there was nothing visible. The sound grew louder, closer, and Maya's grip on her bag tightened. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The rustling stopped abruptly, plunging the highway back into silence. Maya stood still, her ears straining for any sign of movement. The breeze picked up again, carrying with it the soft whisper of the grass, but there was no other sound. She took a cautious step back, her gaze darting between the fields and the road ahead. She felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up, a prickling sensation that sent shivers down her spine. Whatever it was, she didn't want to wait around to find out. Maya quickened her pace, her small legs pumping as she hurried down the road. Her heart was racing now, each beat echoing in her ears. The sound of her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the road behind her was empty. The fields swayed gently in the breeze, their golden stalks bending gracefully. But there was no sign of movement, no rustling in the grass. "Don't be scared," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. It's just the wind. But the feeling of unease lingered. As she continued walking, the road began to change. The smooth asphalt gave way to cracks and patches of dirt, and the fields on either side grew wilder, more overgrown. The air felt heavier here, thick with the scent of dry earth and sun-baked grass. Maya's pace slowed as she approached a bend in the road. She could see something up ahead, a small wooden sign, weathered and leaning at an angle. She squinted, trying to make out the faded letters. Wilkes Junction, 3 miles, it read. Relief washed over her like a wave. A town. She wasn't sure what kind of town it was or if anyone there would help her, but it was better than being stuck in the middle of nowhere. She quickened her pace, her tired legs fueled by the hope of finding safety. The thought of seeing people again, of maybe finding someone kind, gave her the strength to keep going. But as she walked, the sense of unease returned. The fields around her seemed quieter now, the rustling of the grass almost non-existent. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if it were pressing down on her. Maya glanced around nervously, her small hands clutching the straps of her bag. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, that something or someone was watching her from the shadows. The sign that promised Wilkes Junction felt like a beacon of hope to Maya. Just 3 miles. She could make it. She had to. The thought of reaching the town filled her with a mixture of determination and desperation. Maybe someone there would listen, maybe someone would care. But the unease wouldn't leave her. It clung to her like a shadow, growing heavier with every step. The fields that once felt open and endless now seemed suffocating, the tall grass pressing in from both sides of the road. The sound came again. This time it was louder, unmistakable, a rustling, like something moving through the grass. Maya froze, her breath caught in her throat. She turned her head slowly, her wide eyes scanning the golden stalks. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice shaking. No answer. The rustling stopped, but the silence that followed felt even more unsettling. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and heavy. Maya's fingers tightened around the straps of her bag as she took a step forward, then another. "I'm not scared," she whispered, trying to convince herself. "It's just the wind. Just the wind." But deep down, she knew it wasn't. She quickened her pace, her small feet pounding against the cracked asphalt. The sun hung high in the sky, its rays beating down on her, but the warmth did little to comfort her. Sweat trickled down her back, and her throat ached with dryness. As she walked, she tried to focus on the road ahead. She imagined what Wilkes Junction might look like, a small town with friendly people, maybe a diner where she could get a glass of water. The thought of sitting in a cool, shaded room made her heart ache with longing. But the rustling returned. This time, it was closer, louder. Maya spun around, her heart racing. The grass on the left side of the road shifted, parting slightly as if something or someone was moving through it. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice cracking. Still, there was no answer. Her breathing quickened as she backed away, her eyes darting between the grass and the road. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like jelly, her fear rooting her to the spot. And then she saw it, a flash of movement, quick and fleeting, like a shadow darting through the tall stalks. It was too fast for her to make out any details, but it was enough to send her heart into overdrive. Maya turned and bolted. Her feet pounded against the road as she ran, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She didn't dare look back, too afraid of what she might see. The fields blurred past her, the road stretching endlessly in front of her. Just keep going, she told herself, the words a frantic chant in her mind. Don't stop. Don't look back. Her legs burned with the effort, and her chest ached, but she didn't stop. The thought of whatever was in the grass was enough to keep her moving. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a small rise in the road. She slowed to a stop, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. She turned around, her eyes scanning the fields behind her. Nothing. The grass swayed gently in the breeze, innocent and still. There was no sign of movement, no rustling, no shadows. Maya's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her small body trembling. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her bag, the adrenaline leaving her drained and exhausted. She sat there for a moment, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. She hated feeling this way, weak, scared, helpless. She wanted to be brave, to prove that she could handle anything. But right now, all she wanted was her mom's comforting arms, her soft voice telling her everything would be okay. Wiping her tears, Maya forced herself to stand. She couldn't stay here, not when she was so close to Wilkes Junction. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and started walking again. The road began to change as she continued. The cracks in the asphalt grew wider, and patches of grass sprouted through the gaps. The fields on either side gave way to sparse clusters of trees, their branches casting long shadows across the road. The air grew cooler, the sun dipping lower in the sky. Maya's stomach growled, a sharp reminder of how long it had been since she'd eaten. She rummaged through her bag, pulling out a bruised apple. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She bit into the apple, the sweet juice momentarily distracting her from her fear. As she chewed, she thought about her mom. Was she worried? Did she know Maya hadn't made it to school? Maya's step slowed as a new thought crept into her mind. What if the bus driver had told everyone she ran away? What if no one was looking for her? No, she whispered, shaking her head. Mom knows I wouldn't do that. But doubt lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. The trees grew thicker as she walked, their gnarled branches arching over the road like a canopy. The shadows deepened, and the air grew heavier, carrying with it a faint, earthy smell. Maya's footsteps faltered as she approached a bend in the road. Something about this stretch felt different, darker, quieter. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. A low, guttural sound reached her ears, faint but unmistakable. It was unlike anything she'd ever heard, a mix between a growl and a moan. Her heart leaped into her throat as she turned toward the sound. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, forming shapes that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The sound came again, louder this time. Maya took a step back, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. And then she saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, staring at her from the shadows. Maya froze mid-bite, her fork hovering over her plate. "Something special," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman leaned forward, her weathered hands clasped together on the table. The light from the fireplace danced across her face, casting long shadows that made her expression hard to read. "Yes, child. You may not know it yet, but there's a reason why you've endured what you have. There's a reason you were left out there today." Maya's stomach twisted. She didn't know how to respond. She had spent her life being told she didn't belong, being treated as if she were invisible or worse, unwelcome. And now this stranger was suggesting that there was something about her that mattered. "I'm just me," she said softly, her gaze dropping to the worn wood of the table. The woman smiled, though it was a sad smile, tinged with understanding. "You'll see in time," she said. "The world isn't always kind to those who carry light. But it's people like you who change it." Maya's brow furrowed. She wanted to ask what the woman meant, but exhaustion weighed on her, pulling her eyelids down like heavy curtains. "Get some rest, child," the woman said, rising from the table. "The road ahead will test you. But you'll find your way." Maya woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the cabin window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The warmth of the quilt wrapped around her and the faint smell of pine in the air made her feel safe, almost at home. But then the memories came rushing back: the bus driver, the long walk, the strange noises in the grass. She sat up, her heart sinking as reality settled back in. The older woman was already awake, seated in a rocking chair near the fireplace. She looked up as Maya stirred. "Morning, dear," she said, her voice calm and steady. Maya hesitated, then swung her legs over the side of the bed. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said. The woman nodded. "Of course. But I should warn you, this isn't the end of your journey. It's just the beginning." Maya's stomach churned. She wasn't sure what the woman meant, but the words sent a shiver down her spine. As she prepared to leave, the woman handed her a small object wrapped in cloth. "Take this," she said. "It may not look like much now, but when the time comes, you'll understand its importance." Maya unwrapped the cloth, revealing a smooth stone etched with strange symbols. She turned it over in her hand, puzzled. "What is it?" "Keep it close," the woman said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It'll protect you." The highway stretched endlessly before Maya once again. But this time, she didn't feel as alone. She slipped the stone into her pocket, its weight oddly comforting. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change. The woods thinned out, giving way to rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. The sky above was a deep, cloudless blue, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her steps slowed as she neared a bend in the road. The air felt different here, heavier, as if it were charged with some unseen energy. Maya's hand instinctively went to her pocket, her fingers curling around the stone. Then she heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the wind. It was so soft that she almost thought she had imagined it. But as she stood there, straining to listen, the whisper came again. "Maya." Her breath caught in her throat. She spun around, her eyes darting across the empty road and the hills beyond. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer, only the rustling of the grass in the breeze. Maya's grip on the stone tightened as she forced herself to keep walking. The whisper didn't return, but the feeling of being watched stayed with her, prickling at the back of her neck. By the time she reached the outskirts of a small town, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The town was quiet, almost eerily so, with only a few people milling about. Maya approached a man sweeping the front steps of a general store. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Do you know where I can find someone to help me?" The man looked up, his brow furrowing as he studied her. "You lost, kid?" Maya nodded. "I've been walking for hours. I need to get home." The man's expression softened, and he set down his broom. "Come on inside. Let's see if we can figure something out." The store was small but cozy, with shelves lined with jars of preserves and boxes of supplies. The man motioned for Maya to sit at a small table near the counter. As she waited, she noticed a bulletin board on the wall. Her eyes widened as she spotted a flyer with her picture on it. "Missing," it read in bold letters. Before she could react, the man returned with a glass of water and a plate of crackers. He followed her gaze to the flyer and frowned. "That you?" Maya nodded, her heart pounding. I didn't know anyone was looking for me." The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We don't get much news out here, but someone must have passed through with those flyers. Do you know how far it is to the next town?" Maya asked, hope flickering in her chest. The man hesitated, his expression turning grim. "It's a good ways off," he said. "But you'll want to be careful. Strange things have been happening around here lately." Maya's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" The man shook his head. "Disappearances. Shadows where there shouldn't be. people hearing voices calling their names. Maya's hand went to her pocket, her fingers brushing against the stone. She didn't know why, but the man's words felt connected to everything she had experienced so far: the whispers, the strange feeling of being watched. As night fell, the man offered to let Maya stay in the store, but she declined. Something inside her told her she needed to keep moving. "You're a brave one," the man said as she stepped back onto the road. "But be careful. Not everything out here is what it seems." The night was dark and still, the only sound the crunch of Maya's footsteps on the gravel road. The stars above were bright, but they did little to chase away the shadows that seemed to gather around her. She held the stone tightly in her hand, its smooth surface warm against her skin. It felt like a tiny anchor, grounding her in the midst of the unknown. The whisper returned, louder this time. "Maya." Her steps faltered, her heart racing. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The shadows seemed to shift, pooling together to form a figure just beyond the edge of the road. It was tall and indistinct, its outline flickering like a candle flame. Maya's breath hitched as the figure stepped closer. Maya's grip tightened around the stone as the shadowy figure drew closer. Its form shifted and swirled, never quite solid, like smoke caught in a breeze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice trembling but louder this time. The figure stopped a few paces away. Though it had no face, Maya could feel its gaze, sharp and unrelenting. "You carry something that doesn't belong to you," it said, its voice a low, echoing growl. Maya's fingers closed protectively around the stone in her pocket. "This," she said, her voice quivering. "The old woman gave it to me. She said it would protect me." The figure tilted its head, its form flickering like a dying flame. "She was wrong," it said. "It does not protect, it binds. And now, it binds you." Maya took a shaky step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't understand," she said. "You will," the figure replied. It began to dissolve, its shadowy tendrils dispersing into the night air. "But you must move quickly. They are already coming for you." Maya stared at the empty space where the figure had stood, her mind racing. Who were they? And what had the old woman really given her? The road ahead seemed darker than before, every shadow now a potential threat. Maya forced herself to keep walking, though each step felt heavier with fear. The stone in her pocket grew warmer, almost as if it were alive. She pulled it out and held it up, studying the strange symbols etched into its surface. They glowed faintly in the darkness, casting a soft, golden light that illuminated the road ahead. For the first time since she'd stepped off the bus, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Whatever this stone was, it wasn't ordinary and maybe it could help her. The light from the stone revealed a fork in the road up ahead, one path leading deeper into the hills and the other veering toward a dense forest. Maya hesitated, unsure of which way to go. As she stood there, the stone pulsed in her hand, its glow growing brighter when she faced the forest. It was as if it were guiding her. Taking a deep breath, Maya stepped onto the forest path. The air grew cooler as the trees closed in around her, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the stars. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath Maya's feet. She held the glowing stone out in front of her, its light casting long shadows that danced across the trees. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the silence. Maya froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned toward the noise, her eyes scanning the underbrush. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at her from the darkness. Maya stumbled backward, clutching the stone tightly. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. The eyes moved closer, and a creature stepped into the light. It was unlike anything Maya had ever seen, tall and wiry, with long limbs and a face that seemed both human and animal. Its eyes, glowing a fiery orange, never left hers. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice a low hiss. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "The stone it led me here." The creature's gaze shifted to the stone in her hand, and its expression changed. "You have no idea what you're holding, do you?" Maya shook her head. "The woman said it would protect me, but now I don't know." "What is it?" The creature took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "That is no ordinary stone," it said. "It's a key. A key to a door that should never be opened." Maya's mind raced. A key? A door? None of this made any sense. She stared at the creature, trying to process its words. "What door?" she asked. The creature's eyes narrowed. "The one that separates your world from theirs," it said. "A fragile barrier, held together by this." It motioned toward the stone. Maya's fingers tightened around the smooth surface. "If it's so important, why did she give it to me?" The creature's expression darkened. "Because you are one of the few who can carry it without being destroyed." Maya's stomach churned. "Destroyed? By what?" The creature hesitated, its fiery eyes flickering. "By them," it said simply. "The ones who seek to break the barrier. The ones who will stop at nothing to claim what you hold." A chill ran down Maya's spine. She thought of the shadowy figure on the road, its ominous warning still fresh in her mind. "They're already looking for me," she whispered. The creature nodded. "And they will find you, unless you learn to use it." Maya's hands trembled as she held up the stone. "How do I use it?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The creature took another step closer, its gaze locked on the glowing symbols. "The stone responds to your will," it said. "But only if your heart is strong and your purpose clear." Maya frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," the creature said, "you must decide what you're fighting for. The stone will not obey a heart filled with doubt." Maya looked down at the stone, its golden glow lighting up her small hands. Doubt swirled inside her, heavy and suffocating. She was just a little girl, how could she fight something she didn't even understand? But then she thought of the bus driver's cruel eyes, the way the passengers had looked right through her as if she didn't matter. She thought of the old woman's sad smile and the man's warning at the store. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been overlooked, cast aside, or treated as if they didn't belong. Taking a deep breath, Maya looked up at the creature. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady. The creature studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well," it said. "But be warned, using the stone comes at a cost." The forest path grew narrower as Maya followed the creature deeper into the woods. The stone's light guided her steps, illuminating roots and rocks that could have tripped her in the darkness. As they walked, the creature explained more about the barrier and the worlds it separated. "Long ago, our worlds were one," it said. "But chaos reigned. The stone was created to keep the peace, to seal the barrier and protect your kind from ours." Maya listened intently, the weight of the stone in her pocket feeling heavier with every word. "Why would anyone want to break the barrier?" she asked. The creature's fiery eyes flickered. "Power," it said simply. "For some, power is worth any price." Maya shivered. She thought of the shadowy figure and its ominous warning. What happens if they get the stone? The creature stopped and turned to face her, its expression grim. "Your world falls," it said. The energy emanating from the journal was subtle but undeniable. Its warmth seeped into Maya's hands, radiating through her small frame. She stepped closer to the driver, each step deliberate and unwavering. The crowded bus depot, bustling moments ago, had gone eerily quiet as people turned to watch the scene unfold. "You left me there," Maya said, her voice calm but laced with an authority no one could ignore. You left me because you thought I didn't matter. Because you thought I was too small, too powerless to do anything about it. The driver stammered, his confidence unraveling. I didn't mean," he began, but Maya cut him off with a sharp look. "You didn't mean to abandon me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly, the weight of her words slicing through the air. "You didn't mean to make me feel like nothing?" The journal in her hand glowed faintly, the symbols on its cover shifting and rearranging themselves as if they were alive. Maya could feel its power responding to her emotions, amplifying her presence. "I may be small," Maya said, her gaze never wavering from the driver's face, "but I'm not powerless. And you're about to find out just how wrong you were." A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The journal's light intensified, casting long shadows across the depot walls. The driver stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. Around them, the crowd began to murmur, uncertain whether to stay or flee. "Stop," the driver shouted, his voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Maya didn't answer. She opened the journal, its pages flipping wildly as if moved by an invisible wind. The light from the book grew brighter, enveloping her in a golden glow that made her seem larger than life. The driver fell to his knees, shielding his eyes from the brilliance. "I'm sorry," he cried, his voice cracking. "I didn't know." Maya closed the journal with a resounding snap, and the light vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The depot fell silent once more, the only sound the driver's ragged breathing. "I don't want your apology," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want you to remember this moment. Remember what happens when you treat people like they don't matter." Maya turned to leave, the crowd parting like the Red Sea to let her pass. But as she walked away, a woman stepped forward, a passenger who had been on the bus that fateful day. "Wait," the woman said, her voice hesitant. Maya paused, glancing over her shoulder. "I should have said something," the woman admitted, her eyes filled with regret. "I saw what he did, and I stayed silent. I'm so sorry." For a moment, Maya said nothing. Then she nodded, her expression softening. "It's not too late to make things right," she said. The woman nodded back, determination replacing the shame in her eyes. As Maya walked out of the depot, she felt a strange sense of calm. The journal was warm in her hands, its power humming softly like a heartbeat. She had faced the driver, confronted her fear, and shown everyone who had doubted her that she was stronger than they could have imagined. But Maya knew her journey wasn't over. The old woman's cryptic words echoed in her mind, "You are the keeper now." She didn't fully understand what it meant, but she knew it was only the beginning. The sun was setting as Maya reached the edge of town. She stopped and turned back, taking in the sight of the bus depot silhouetted against the golden sky. She thought about the people she had left behind, the passengers who had ignored her, the driver who had abandoned her, and the woman who had finally found her voice. They were part of her story now, just as she was part of theirs. Maya looked down at the journal in her hands. The symbols on its cover glowed faintly, as if responding to her thoughts. She didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but she wasn't afraid. With the journal's power and her newfound strength, she was ready to face whatever came next. Maya's footsteps echoed on the cobblestone streets as she left the bus depot behind. The journal hummed softly in her hands, a reminder of the strange power it contained and the responsibility that came with it. Her heart still raced, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what had just unfolded. She knew she couldn't stop now. The old woman's words echoed in her mind, "The journal will guide you, but only if you are willing to face the truth about who you are." Maya clenched her fists, determination hardening her resolve. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. As night fell, Maya found herself on the outskirts of town, where the fields stretched endlessly into the horizon. A cold wind rustled the tall grass, carrying with it a faint whisper. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but as the sound grew louder, she realized it was coming from the journal. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the book. The pages glowed faintly, the symbols shifting to form a map. At its center was a small, pulsating dot, a destination calling her forward. Maya took a deep breath. "Where are you taking me now?" she whispered, though she knew the journal wouldn't answer. She followed the map for hours, the terrain growing rougher with each step. The soft dirt of the fields gave way to rocky hills, and the wind carried a strange chill that made her shiver. But Maya pressed on, her fear outweighed by her curiosity and determination. Eventually, she reached a clearing where an ancient oak tree stood tall and proud, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Beneath its roots, a faint glow emanated from the ground. Maya knelt down, her hands trembling as she brushed away the dirt. What she uncovered made her gasp. A second journal, identical to the one she carried but with a darker, almost ominous energy radiating from it. As soon as she touched it, a wave of memories flooded her mind. Images of people she didn't recognize, places she'd never been, and battles fought long ago. She saw the faces of those who had carried the journals before her, their strength and courage, but also their sacrifices. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. "You shouldn't have come here." Maya spun around, clutching both journals tightly. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in black and carrying an air of menace. Their face was obscured, but their voice was cold and sharp. "Who are you?" Maya demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The figure chuckled darkly. "Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is what you've done. You've awakened the second journal, and now you've drawn attention to yourself." "I didn't mean to," Maya said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Intentions don't matter," the figure replied. "What matters is that the balance has been disrupted. Do you even know what you're holding?" Maya looked down at the journals in her hands. "Power," she said simply. "And responsibility." The figure stepped closer, their movements smooth and deliberate. "Power, yes. But responsibility? That depends on who wields it. And I'm afraid you're not ready." The ground beneath them began to tremble as the figure raised their hand, summoning a dark energy that swirled around them like a storm. Maya felt a surge of fear, but she refused to back down. "I may not be ready," she said, opening the glowing journal, "but I'm not alone." The light from the journal flared to life, pushing back the darkness. Maya could feel its power coursing through her, filling her with strength she didn't know she possessed. The figure hissed, recoiling slightly. "You don't even know how to use it," they sneered. "Maybe not," Maya admitted, "but I'm learning." The air crackled with energy as the two faced off, light and dark clashing in a battle that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. Maya's hands moved instinctively, tracing the symbols in the journal as they glowed brighter with each stroke. The ground beneath the oak tree split open, revealing a hidden chamber filled with ancient artifacts and inscriptions. Maya's eyes widened as she realized this was no ordinary battle, it was a test. The figure lunged at her, their dark energy coiling like a serpent. Maya dodged, her movements guided by the journal's whispers. She could feel it showing her the way, helping her tap into the strength that had always been inside her. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions," the figure shouted, their voice echoing with anger and desperation. "And you don't understand what it's like to be underestimated," Maya shot back. With one final surge of energy, Maya slammed the journals together. The resulting explosion of light was blinding, forcing the figure to retreat into the shadows. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the clearing was eerily still. Maya collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at the journals, now fused into one, their power humming softly but no longer overwhelming. The old woman's words echoed in her mind once more, "You are the keeper now." For the first time, Maya understood what that meant. She wasn't just a child abandoned on a highway. She was a protector, a guardian of something far greater than herself. As dawn broke, Maya stood beneath the ancient oak tree, the fused journal clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face it. And this time, she wasn't afraid. The days following Maya's confrontation with the bus driver were a whirlwind of change. The story of the little girl left stranded on a deserted highway quickly reached every corner of the town, sparking outrage and self-reflection among its people. At first, the driver tried to defend himself, claiming it had been a misunderstanding. But the truth was undeniable, and the passengers, guilt-ridden by their silence, came forward to tell the real story. Each testimony painted a damning picture of a man who had acted out of prejudice and cruelty. The bus company was quick to act. The driver was terminated immediately, his behavior condemned in public statements. "We will not tolerate discrimination in any form," the company declared. But for Maya, the damage couldn't be undone with a single apology or act of accountability. Maya's story didn't end there. The experience had changed her, unlocking not just the mysterious power within her but also a sense of purpose she couldn't ignore. She stood before the town council, her small frame dwarfed by the large wooden podium, but her voice was clear and unwavering. "What happened to me wasn't just about one bad person," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It happened because everyone around him let it happen. We need to be better not just as individuals, but as a community." The room was silent, each word sinking into the hearts of those who had gathered. Maya wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every person who had ever been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or small. The council took action, prompted by the overwhelming public outcry. Policies were put in place to ensure that public transportation was safe and inclusive for everyone, regardless of their background. Diversity training programs were introduced, and the town began holding open forums to address systemic issues that had long been ignored. But Maya didn't stop at her own town. With the old woman's journal as her guide, Maya began to travel. Each page seemed to lead her to a new place, a new person in need of help. The journal wasn't just a source of power, it was a map, a guide to uncovering stories of injustice and bringing light to dark places. In one town, Maya helped a group of school children stand up to a principal who had been unfairly punishing students from poorer neighborhoods. In another, she uncovered a long-buried secret about land stolen from a family generations ago and worked to help them reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Everywhere she went, Maya carried the fused journal with her. Its symbols glowed faintly in her presence, as if it could sense her growing confidence and resolve. People began to talk about the young girl who seemed to appear out of nowhere, always at the right moment. They called her the Keeper, though Maya never introduced herself with any title. She wasn't looking for fame or recognition. She was simply doing what she knew was right. Back in her own town, Maya's absence was felt deeply. The passengers from that fateful day, once strangers to her, began organizing community events to honor her bravery. They created programs to teach children about kindness and standing up for what's right. One of the passengers, the woman who had apologized to Maya at the bus depot, became a key figure in these efforts. "Maya taught us something we'll never forget," she said during a town meeting. "She showed us that silence is complicity. And she reminded us that even the smallest voice can make a difference." The town erected a small monument in Maya's honor near the bus depot, a simple plaque that read, "For Maya, who taught us to see, to speak, and to stand." As Maya's journey continued, she began to understand the true depth of the journal's power. It wasn't just about magic or energy, it was about connecting people, revealing truths, and healing wounds that had long been ignored. One day, while flipping through the journal, Maya came across a blank page that began to fill with words as she touched it. The words weren't written in the mysterious symbols she had come to recognize but in her own handwriting. The Keeper's strength isn't in the journal. It's in her heart. The journal is only a mirror, reflecting what has always been within. Maya closed the journal, a quiet smile spreading across her face. She understood now that her power wasn't something the old woman had given her, it was something she had always carried, something that had been awakened through her trials. In time, Maya returned to her town, not as the frightened girl who had been abandoned but as a young leader who had changed lives. The people welcomed her back with open arms, their faces filled with gratitude and admiration. She visited the monument in her honor, tracing the words with her fingers. She didn't see herself as a hero, but she knew the message was bigger than her. As she walked through the streets, children ran up to her, asking her to tell them about her adventures. Maya laughed, sitting down with them and sharing stories about the people she had met and the lessons she had learned. One little girl, clutching a notebook, asked, "How do I become brave like you?" Maya smiled. "You already are," she said. "You just have to believe it." Maya's journey didn't end there. The journal continued to guide her, taking her to places she couldn't have imagined and connecting her with people whose lives she would change forever. But no matter where she went, she carried the memory of that highway, the bus driver, and the old woman who had given her the journal. Those moments had shaped her, turning pain into strength and fear into purpose. And as the sun set on another day, Maya stood at the edge of a new horizon, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew her story wasn't just her own, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt small and found the courage to rise. For Maya, justice wasn't just about setting things right. It was about creating a world where no one would ever be left behind again. And she was just getting started. As Maya stood on the steps of her school, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, she felt a sense of peace she had never experienced before. The air was crisp, the sun just beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the town. Everything had changed. What had once been a place of fear and uncertainty had become a symbol of her journey, of her growth. The school, the same place where she had been abandoned on that day, was now a place of pride for her, a reminder of how far she had come. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She thought about everything that had happened, the long, lonely walk on the highway, the strange and powerful journal, the lessons learned from every step she took. Maya had once been that scared little girl, trembling in fear, uncertain of her future. But today, she was different. Stronger. Wiser. And, above all, confident in who she had become. The road had been painful. There were days when the weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on her. There were times when the challenges seemed too big, too overwhelming. But Maya had learned one crucial thing through it all. Sometimes, the smallest voice can echo the loudest, she whispered to herself, the words floating in the evening breeze. And those who try to silence it? They never see the strength it hides. Her voice had once been a whisper, a small, fragile thing. But now, it was strong. It was a voice that could shake the walls of injustice, one word at a time. It was a voice that had been tested in the hardest of circumstances and had not broken. She looked around at the people who had gathered near the school gates, some of them students, others parents and teachers. All of them had witnessed her transformation. She had become a symbol not just for them, but for countless others who had been silenced by fear or hatred. Maya wasn't just a girl who had overcome her circumstances, she had become proof that anyone, no matter how small, could change the world. The old woman's words came back to her, echoing in her mind. You have something special, Maya. You just need to find it. And when you do, never let anyone take it from you. Maya had found it. She had found her strength, her voice, her purpose. And no one could take that from her, not now, not ever. As she walked toward the group of children standing by the playground, Maya saw a familiar face among them. It was the little girl who had asked her how to become brave. The same girl who had looked up to Maya with wide, hopeful eyes. Maya knelt down beside her, smiling. Hey, you, she said softly. How's it going? The little girl grinned. I've been thinking about what you said. You really believe I can be brave? Maya nodded. Of course I do. You just have to believe it too. The little girl looked down at the ground for a moment, then looked back up at Maya, determination in her eyes. I think I can. I'm going to stand up to my brother next time he teases me. Maya's heart warmed. That's the spirit. Remember, it's not always about fighting with your fists. It's about standing tall, no matter what anyone says. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, you just need to believe in yourself. The little girl smiled, clearly inspired. Maya stood up and watched her join her friends, already talking about how she was going to make a difference in her own way. In the days that followed, Maya's life continued to be filled with new challenges and opportunities. She continued her work with the journal, helping those who needed it, uncovering injustices, and shining a light on the darkest corners. But there was something different now, something powerful about the way Maya approached each situation. She no longer feared the unknown. She welcomed it. The journal, which had once seemed like a heavy burden, was now a trusted companion, a tool to help her understand the world and make it a better place. Maya had learned that true power didn't come from the pages of the journal or from any kind of magic. It came from within. It came from believing in yourself, even when the world tried to push you down. And Maya's belief in herself had become a beacon of hope for others. She had inspired people not just to speak out, but to stand firm in the face of adversity. To fight for what was right. To never give up, no matter how small they felt. Maya stood at the front of her classroom, watching the students file in. They were talking and laughing among themselves, full of energy, full of life. But as she stood there, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for each of them. They were the future. And she was going to help them realize that no matter where they came from, no matter how many times they had been pushed aside, their voices mattered. She had learned that strength came from standing up, not just for yourself but for others too. Maya understood now that she had a responsibility not just to herself, but to the people who looked up to her. Every day, she could make a difference. Every word she spoke, every action she took, was an opportunity to show others the strength they had within themselves. Sometimes, Maya said to her students, life will try to tell you that you're too small, too young, or too quiet to make a difference. But I'm here to tell you that it's not about how loud you are or how big you are. It's about how much you believe in yourself, how much you believe in the power of what's right. That's how you change the world. The students listened, wide-eyed and eager to learn from Maya. They had already heard her story, the story of how she had overcome so much. But now, it was about more than just overcoming her past. It was about teaching them to do the same. Maya smiled as she looked around the room. These were the faces of the future. And she was proud to be a part of their journey. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the town, Maya stood outside her school once again. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just looking at the world around her. She was looking at the world as it could be a place where no one was ever left behind, where every voice was heard, and where every person had the strength to rise above their struggles. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she was ready for it. She had faced the hardest challenges of her life and had come out stronger. She had learned that it wasn't about fighting the world, it was about believing in the world's ability to change, and knowing that every person had the power to be a part of that change. Maya took a deep breath and looked toward the horizon. The world was waiting. And Maya knew she was ready to face it, with her head held high and her heart full of hope. Sometimes, the smallest voice can echo the loudest, she whispered to herself. And those who try to silence it? They never see the strength it hides. And with that, Maya stepped forward, ready to continue her journey. The journey of a girl who had learned that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have the power to make a difference. And that, Maya knew, was the greatest strength of all.